been trying to explain something to someone, maybe a picture or a process, and all you can come to is to say, here, let me show you. If you have, then you probably understand the value of an image. A picture really is worth 1,000 words, and sometimes more, depending on the situation. Hi, my name is Bethany Conrad, and today I'm going to be talking to you about Sonja Foss's theory of visual rhetoric. This is for Dr. Mullen's COMS 520. Today we will be looking at the definition of rhetorical criticism, visual rhetoric as an artifact, visual rhetoric as a theoretical framework, some examples of this theory, the debate over this theory, and then of course conclusions. So let's get started. First of all, what is rhetoric? It was not until 1970 that this theory was introduced to the Association for Rhetoric. At that time, a proposal was made to change the definition of rhetorical criticism. Sloan and his colleagues said that rhetorical criticism may be applied to any human act, process, product, or artifact that may formulate, sustain, or modify attention, perceptions, attitudes, or behavior. Now that's a whole lot of words, but what does that actually mean? Well, basically, it means it's any element that can affect human behavior can be studied rhetorically. So anything that you can think of that may change the way you feel or think about something should be studied from a rhetorical viewpoint. There are a couple goals of rhetorical criticism. The most obvious is to understand meaning. What are we trying to communicate? What are we trying to say? What is beyond just the surface? That's what we're trying to understand when we study something rhetorically. We want to understand more than just what's given at face value. Now, Sonja Foss talks about her theory of visual rhetoric, and in this she states that visual rhetoric should increase awareness of the visual phenomena in surrounding environments and decrease the tolerance of the elements that may cause negative responses. This is found in an article written by Sonja Foss in 1982. Now, this kind of explains a little bit about what visual rhetoric should do or should not do. But basically, the idea is that we should increase our awareness of images and how they're affecting us, and as such, we'll be able to respond accordingly. If something's affecting us and causing negative responses, we want to limit our use or our exposure to those elements. Now, let's talk a little bit more specifically about Sonja Foss's theory of visual rhetoric. In this theory, she defines visual rhetoric as two different things. First of all, she defines it as an artifact. Now, in this sense, visual rhetoric is actually a noun. It's talking about the picture or the image itself is actually visual rhetoric. She also talks about visual rhetoric as a theoretical framework. Now, this is a way to apply her theory to any element that you may wish to study. And in this way, scholars have been able to use her theory to study many different images, pictures, different things throughout history. So first, let's talk about visual rhetoric as an artifact, and then we'll get into the theoretical framework. So, there are three criteria that must be met in order for an element or an image to be considered visual rhetoric. First, there must be an indirect connection to a reference point. Now, I use the example of a stop sign for this. As we all know, stop signs are in the shape of an octagon. Now, many years ago, when they were creating stop signs, nothing about the shape of an octagon inherently said stop. But they chose to use that shape, and because we understand it to mean that, we now understand that an octagon means stop. So I could show you a picture of an octagon without the letters S-T-O-P on it, and you would probably still understand that it's a symbol for stop. Because there's an indirect connection to the reference point, the stop sign is considered visual rhetoric. There also must be human intervention. Now, I use the example of a bald eagle for this. As we all know, a bald eagle is a bird in nature. In America, we have deemed it to mean freedom. Now, an eagle in and of itself doesn't inherently mean freedom. Maybe you could talk about the symbolism of an eagle flying and how there's freedom in the way that he flies, but there's nothing inherent about an eagle that actually means freedom for America. It's only because humans have intervened and have deemed it as such that this animal has now become a symbol of freedom. And because of that, we can call it visual rhetoric. Finally, there must be the presence of an audience. The purpose of visual rhetoric is to cultivate ideas or images among an audience. So if there is no audience, there's really no purpose. Therefore, these three things make up an artifact from visual rhetoric. And this is according to Foss in her theory of visual rhetoric handbook that she wrote in 2005. Now let's talk about visual rhetoric as a framework. As I said earlier, this is a theoretical framework that scholars can use to apply to any visual image they wish to study. There are a couple things that they have to look at in order for this to be considered part of Foss's theory. First of all, they look at the nature of the image. Now this would be the obvious or even implied elements, such as the media, the materials, the shape, things like that, as well as ideas and themes. The obvious and implied elements are looked at within the nature of the image. Secondly, scholars look at the function of the image. Now this is the action that the image is communicating. And then finally, they look at the evaluation of the image. Now this stage ties in the first two, the nature and the function. Scholars look to say, is this image actually communicating what we think it should communicate, or what the nature of the image says that it should be functioning as. Okay, so let's look at a couple examples. First, I want to talk about the Quaker tapestry. This is a study done by Graves in 2001. As you can see here in this picture, this tapestry is the Religious Society of Friends. The Quakers put this together, and it's an idea that they were trying to communicate a sense of unity. Now, you might think that perhaps Graves came to his conclusion that unity is communicated simply because of the wording that's put on here or the way that the picture shows different elements. But that's not actually what Graves said. He actually looked at the way that this tapestry was created. I didn't know much about embroidery before reading this article, but Graves states that they used something called crewel embroidery. Now, in this type of embroidery, it actually requires multiple participants. And one person may start working on one element and pass it on to the next person. Now, that person has to continue with the same lettering or the same picture and make it look as if only one person did it. And as such, they had to really work closely together and be following to make sure that all of the letters looked exactly the same. Now, this is different from weaving or other types of needlework where only one person at a time can be working. And because they created it this way, Graves said that they came up with a sense of unity. They communicated this more than just through the words that they were saying. He came to several other conclusions, but for the sake of time, I'm going to move on to my next example. Next, let's look at Olson's 1990 his study done on Benjamin Franklin's commemorative medal. It was called Libertas Americana. Now, Benjamin Franklin created these medals after the American Revolution. Now, I don't know what you see when you first look at this picture, but I certainly didn't come to the same conclusion that Olson did. But he said that Benjamin Franklin was representing a sense of gratitude. These medals became a way to express our gratitude to the French for their help in the American Revolution. And they actually worked to establish good relations between the United States and France. And it was because Olson applied a theoretical framework of visual rhetoric to these images that he was able to draw these conclusions. So these are just a couple examples that tell you a little bit about how we can apply the theory of visual rhetoric. Now, there is still considerable debate as to whether this theory is actually valid and whether it should be included in the rhetorical criticism. Braden, as cited in Foss 2005, said, "I argue that by inclination and training, most of us are best qualified to study the speech or rhetorical act." Now, basically, Braden was saying that we really should be studying speech and discourse because it's the only thing that we're trained to study. And even Foss admits that communication scholars lack the knowledge and understanding of visual images as they function. It is important to note that maybe we don't have the training that's required, but that doesn't mean we cannot arrive there. Haughey 2009 said there's an insufficient appreciation for how visual images function differently from their verbal counterpart. It is difficult to make a distinction between the two, and as communication scholars, we're more trained to understand speech. But I think that's changing. My perspective on the theory is that it's a valid and effective way of analyzing visual images. I think it's important that visual images be included in our understanding of communication because we're a growing field, and visual communication is a growing field as well. Progress does still need to be made as to how this theory works and what visual images actually are, but I think Sonja Foss's theory gets us well on our way. So in conclusion, I hope you have a better understanding of Sonja Foss's theory of visual rhetoric, and I hope you do understand that pictures really are worth 1,000 words, and sometimes even more. Thank you.